one thing that really sticks out is how they move their product from the factory to the ports. I mean, some of the trucks that I see over there and some of the ways that they move product from the factory to the ports is pretty archaic. In China, they seem to have a good logistics system. They have their factories near their ports. They have roads that are built from their factories to the ports. They're a little bit more advanced than what I see in Vietnam. Now I flip that and say, okay, I'm here in Buffalo and I'm going to try and move that product from that factory to the port. I'm going to have a lot of trouble. So when I'm thinking about INCOterms, I'm probably going to want to stay away from pre-carriage. Not to say that I don't want to control as much as I do, and I'm sure the people that work for me will tell you I'm a control freak. I like to control things when I can, but this is not something, I don't think I want to control that. Okay? So that's the juggling act too with INCOterms. Okay? You want to know what you can control, you're going to want to know what you can't, when to give in, when to take control. Okay? Let's see what else I have here. Another thing that you want to think about before we get into the specific INCOterms is every company will be different. Okay? What works for Taylor Devices might not work for you, Denise, might not work for Carl. It's different ways of thinking, different structures. Carl has plants overseas, you might not. Jackie, you might have a better relationship with your vendors. Your products are different. Your risk tolerance is different. So one thing we're not going to do here today is I'm not going to sell you on one particular term or say, this is the one that you should always use. There's two that I'm going to try and discourage you from using, but I'm not going to say that this is the one that fits best for everybody. All right? Your methods of shipping will also determine what your INCOterms are. Shipping air freight, shipping ocean freight. Shipping delayed air freight to, next day, hot emergency air freight. Okay. Okay, and we talked about two terms, and I'm throwing a lot at you right now because these are things that we're going to be going over. Two terms that we should all understand is a U.S. PPI, was the United States primary party of interest. U.S. PPI. Another term is importer of record. And a third term I could throw out there is an FPPI, which is the foreign primary party of interest. Now, The reason I bring up those terms now is I want to give you those terms as they relate to the U.S. government. Okay? If you're exporting a product, doesn't matter what INCOterm you use, the U.S. government looks at your company as the U.S. PPI. You are the United States primary party of interest. They don't care, well, I shouldn't say they don't care, but they're not going after any company outside of the United States. Okay? So if you export. If you import, the U.S. government is watching the importer of record. So, one thing as a freight forwarder we never, ever, ever do for our customers is we never tell our customer that we will be the importer of record for them. If an importer or if a freight forwarder tells you that they will do that for you, that should raise a red flag. Okay? Being an importer of record means that the government comes to that particular entity for all the record keeping. And you're saying, Mike, why is it a bad thing if a freight forwarder wants to do that for me and takes me completely out of it? I'm going to tell you the same reason you don't want a freight forwarder doing it as you don't want a foreign company doing it, because ultimately it will come back to you. Ultimately it will. So if I take on the responsibility and I mess it up, the government's going to get me in trouble, but ultimately they're coming back to you and you'll get in trouble too. So you won't have any control. I'm going to control everything. You're not going to know it. And then when they come knocking on your door, you're not going to know what to say. Okay? So that's why if you're importing, you should be the importer of record, not your freight forwarder. Okay? Here's a time when more isn't better. Less is better. You want that responsibility. Okay? We're going to talk about a couple INCOterms that try to take that away from you. You don't want that. Pretty much know most people in here. And I have customers in here too, so that's always a good thing. My name is Mike Diotti. I'm the Vice President for Speed Global Services. And this will be the only time I'll talk about a company, okay? I'm the Vice President for Speed Global Services. We are an international freight forwarder. We're a customs broker. We're domestic trucking, domestic warehousing, and 3PL. All right? One of the ground rules that I would like to set today is I'm going to talk a lot about freight forwarding. All right? And I'm going to talk a lot about partners. When I talk about freight forwarders or I talk about partners, it is not a commercial for my company, even though I do that. Okay? I would like to talk more in generality as far as the people who are out there. And, you know, one of the things that I like to say and I like to drill in almost every seminar that I do, whether it's an international seminar or an INCO seminar, but it's very important to establish relationships. Okay? And again, when I talk about relationships, I'm not talking about a relationship with us as for my company. I'm talking about relationships with a freight forwarder, with a customs broker, okay? And hopefully I'm going to show you today where those relationships can really pay off, all right? I'm going to show you some tricks, like especially when you're dealing with domestic as well as international, the rules are different, okay? And I know a lot of times companies try to mix those two rules and think they're the same and think that they're going to apply the same way. They don't, all right? And if you're in the quoting game, all right, and that's your sole purpose for making that phone call to a freight forwarder, they can pretty much tell you whatever you want to hear.